Hello and welcome to three very important conversations. My name is David Larson. I'm a teacher in the Faculty of Religion at Loma Linda University, and I'm delighted you've joined us for this very special experience. Our topic is homosexuality in the Seventh-day Adventist family. This is a very important topic for at least a couple of reasons. On the one hand, there is no issue that is theoretically more tantalizing than this one because it challenges us to integrate what we learn from Scripture, most importantly, but also what we learn from tradition, reason, and experience. It's not an exaggeration to say that this is a life and death matter. Some people have felt so alienated and estranged and condemned by the church that they love that they have actually ended their own lives. My brother is one of those who ended his life several years ago. He was a homosexual man. We can do better, we must do better, we will do better, and this will be possible if we educate ourselves about the issues at hand. We have three very typical but also influential Seventh-day Adventist families who have agreed to share their journeys with us. We will hear from Walt and Virginia Kaysen. Walt is a physician and Virginia is an accomplished author and public speaker. They had a son who was a homosexual man, a son who was the beloved grandson of Elder H.M.S. Richards. We will also hear from Dr. George Babcock, an accomplished educational administrator in the Seventh-day Adventist Church who has served many institutions abroad and here in the United States for years. Dr. Babcock and his wife are the parents of a lesbian woman. We will hear also from Mrs. Carol Grady. Carol and her husband have been missionaries overseas, and they have served at every level in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They are the parents of a homosexual man. Thank you for joining us for these conversations. We know that you will be blessed.
Marshall died in 1995 of AIDS. He had apparently contracted it about 16 years before when he was in Australia. He died in the local area over near Guerneville. He was 45 years old when he died. He was a very bright individual, artistic. He wrote beautiful poetry. He was musical, very aesthetic, and very well read, widely read. He was very talented. He had an unhappy childhood, which we didn't realize until later, much later. He told us he was gay when he was about 26, I suppose. He had finished college and was working in Australia, and he wrote us a letter, and we just about decompensated at that time.
I, like most everyone else, had no idea that this even existed for a long time, until I was well grown and already a mother. And it was very vaguely discussed in medical terms, more or less. I didn't know anything really about it. However, Marshall told us later that when he was about 7 years old, he knew he was different. And he looked it up in an encyclopedia to try to find out what the problem was and why he was feeling this way. And certainly he found that he probably was homosexual, and he knew that it was bad. And he thought it was bad, so he never told us. And so he grew up thinking that he was evil, and I think this stuck with him the rest of his life. It was a heartbreak for him, of course, And there was a real emotional thing that went on with him, I think. Don't you, honey?
Well, there
when he was little?
Now, we lived on the Oregon coast, Gold Beach, Oregon, a little small town. We had a one-room church school. He went to academy when he was not quite 13, boarding academy at Milo. He was baptized when he was about 14 at Milo. This had worried him, being homosexual. He thought he was evil, and that he had been baptized thinking that this would help him get over it. But it didn't, of course. We moved to Loma Linda when he was in the 11th grade, and he went the last 2 years there. He had really little social life at Loma Linda Academy. There were some unpleasant incidents at Loma Linda, but I don't know the details of them. But I think that there was some things there that hurt him very badly, very deeply. Adolescence is a terribly difficult period in a person's life, regardless of how well adjusted they are. There's problems of rejection and self-esteem and everything else, and adolescence is really a difficult time. We think it should be the happiest time, but it's a difficult time. And the treatment of gays, adolescent and pre-adolescent gays, is really an important and a crucial thing. Again, I have more questions and answers about this, but I would hope that out of the present interest in this subject, that our schools and academies will arrive at some Christian approach to dealing with these young people.
Yeah. Everybody's wondering, and many women, many mothers have called me. In fact, one not too far away, a lady somewhat older than I called and wanted to know what should she do. She just learned that her son was gay. Well, I already knew that he was. And of course, these things stay right in our own hearts and minds. We don't pass anything on that we know. And she asked me, what would I think about that? Her son was going to come home with his man friend. And I said, well, dear, keep him and love him. He's your son. Don't you want to see him at all?
Well, about 42 years ago, I started my work for the church, and I was teaching in a church school. I became principal of the junior academy. After that, I served as a conference superintendent and later on as an associate director of education for a union, and then served for many years overseas, president of a college overseas, and then spent 12 years in the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists in Maryland. And after that, as a senior administrator of an Adventist university. I think that my views were like most people's, in that I felt that it was unnatural, a perversion, something that God was not pleased with. And I think that's what probably the majority of people feel. However, during the days that I was working at the General Conference, the Kinship Organization sent out a little flyer, a small brochure, which was simply to announce their existence and that they had set up a hotline. This made some of the brethren at the GC furious. And so they immediately set up a little committee to see that they could track down who had done this. Well, I was, being in the education department of the GC, I was asked and told that I had to help find out everything that I could. I began to see that there was more to this than what met the eye. And one of the leaders, in fact, the president of the organization at that time, asked me, said, Dr. Babcock, did you sit down one day and make a deliberate decision to be heterosexual? And I thought about that and told him, no, I never did make that decision. I just was. And he said, well, that's true, and that homosexuals are the same way. They don't sit down and make that decision either. And so that started me to thinking. And I believe that that helped to prepare me mentally a little bit for what I would have to face when Sherry told me that she was a lesbian. And of course, at that point in time, that was, very traumatic. It was it was crisis time,
Mm-hmm.
and she was weeping, and so was I, but I told her then that no matter what happened, that she was still my daughter, and I loved her. So that was the beginning. And my wife had a very difficult time with this news, but God is good, and He helped us to cope and to accept Sherry for what she is, and so, my feelings went from the traditional belief or feeling about homosexuality to one of acceptance of the individual for what they are. There have been some rocky times because she has felt a considerable amount of rejection from the church. The thing that probably stands out in my mind as being the most traumatic was one Sabbath, she and Jill, her companion, were there in the Adventist church, sitting on the front row, and the preacher evidently had been tipped off that there were these two women living together, and so he was preaching, and his topic was not on homosexuality at all, but he saw them sitting down there in front of him. He came down from the platform and stood directly in front of them and gave them a lecture right in front of the entire congregation about homosexuality. This was an absolutely terrible thing for Sherry to go through. She felt so badly. And of course, Jill, this happened to be one of the first times that she had gone to an Adventist church. This pastor was so terribly unethical, unkind, unchristlike to come and make a public scene like this in front of the entire church. Sherry was crushed. And it took a long time before she was even willing to go back to an Adventist church. But I'm very happy to report that she got over it. She adjusted in a very mature fashion, and she now attends church every Sabbath with Jill, and their daughter goes to Sabbath school every Sabbath, and so they have weathered the storm. But I believe that one of the major ingredients of the success in weathering the storm was the fact that Sherry's mother and myself and Jill's parents also supported them and encouraged them to rise above this setback and to dedicate their lives to Christ and to following Him, and that they have certainly tried to do. I view myself as a very loyal Seventh-day Adventist, and I'm an Adventist minister as well as an educator. And I read the Bible carefully, and I have studied this topic a great deal. I've read everything that I could get my hands on. I have discovered that we really don't know a whole lot about it, this is certainly not a cut and dried situation, and I'm continually amazed at people who are so quick to condemn and to judge, who have never had to deal with the problem in their own personal lives or in their families' lives. But once you have to deal with it on that level, and you know the people well, and you know that they would never, ever have chosen to be homosexual, because no one in their right mind deliberately selects rejection and disgrace and disfellowship and that sort of thing, because humans just don't like that, if they're in their right mind, of course. And so it has been a very difficult thing, but in my view, after having gone through a lot of prayerful consideration and study, I do not believe that one's sexuality is a choice. Now, obviously, all mortals, all of us, do choose our conduct. But I don't think any of us choose our sexuality. Back when the church was saying, yes, it's okay to be gay, provided you don't act upon it, you know, we heard the old saying, or what has become an old saying anyway, you know, that it's okay to be a fish, just don't swim. And so it is very difficult for young people to live a completely celibate life, because we're programmed, we're made for this need for human companionship, the human touch, and a loving relationship between two people. I mean, this is so basic to our humanness. We just must have that. And now we know that there are a few that can manage to cope with that, and they live a completely celibate life. But the vast majority cannot do that. And so herein lies the problem. Do we allow people to be human and let them fulfill their basic needs for companionship, love and affection, and at the same time they have this homosexuality which they can't get rid of?
I'm a fourth-generation Adventist. I always went to Adventist schools through college. I met a theological student at La Sierra College and married him, and we pastored in southeastern California. Then we went to Hawaii and the Far Eastern Division, and finally to the General Conference.
How did you find out your son was gay?
Well, he was in college, and he had been engaged for 2.5 years to a lovely girl that we had really grown to love. And suddenly, one day when we were talking to him, he told us that he and his fiancée had broken up. And it was such a shock to us. We had had no idea that they were having any problems. And he didn't seem to have any really good reason for why they broke up. As I was thinking about this, all of a sudden I began to remember little things that I had noticed as he grew up, and that had made me feel uneasy, but I just sort of stuffed them down into my subconscious because I really had no knowledge much about homosexuality. But suddenly I began to think all of these things maybe could mean that he was gay. So finally I called him and talked to him, and at first he was a little uncomfortable with the fact that I'd found out without him telling me. He didn't feel like he was ready to let us know yet. But after he got used to the idea that we knew, he was glad he didn't actually have to go through the coming out process with us. We found out. It was a moment that really divided my life into before and after, because I suddenly felt as if, sort of as if he were dead, you know. The first thought was, is he going to be lost? Homosexuals can't go to heaven, can they? That was what I'd always heard. And it was such a shock that I just went walking through my house and banging on the walls and screaming. I just couldn't really believe that this was happening to me or to our family. He decided when he finally realized that God was not going to change him despite all of his prayers, and he was not having the kind of feelings that he expected God to give him when he got engaged. He realized that it wasn't going to work. So he decided that he was going to accept his homosexuality and tell his friends who he really was. And of course, most of his friends accepted him, but a lot of the word got around, and a lot of the other boys in his dorm really began harassing him. They would write things on the wall in the bathroom about how he was a fag, and we should kill fairies and things like that. And he really got quite upset and worried about his own safety, so he ended up moving out of the dorm, staying with some friends. And I think it was a very difficult experience for him. He had been a top student in school, and all of a sudden he was floundering. He was doing student teaching at the time, and he never really got his teaching credentials because of the emotional strains that he was going through. Well, the first thing I had to do when I found out about our son was to realize that obviously the view that I had of a homosexual couldn't be right, because he was such a sweet, loving, gentle person, very had a very spiritual dimension to his personality. And I knew that he couldn't be one of these perverts that I had thought all homosexuals were. So I began to study and question and read a lot. And I have come to the understanding that this is definitely not something that people choose. This is something that they cannot help, that is given to them at birth, I believe, or before birth. And so I think we must not think that it's something that they choose at all. When we first found out, when I found out, I felt that I couldn't talk to anybody about it. It was a very shameful thing, as I understood it at the time. And finally I got to the place where I could tell a few of my friends, and I began to think about other parents who were going through this. They probably felt the same way. And the idea grew in my mind that I ought to write a story about how we had grown and handled this situation and grown in understanding. So I wrote a book which was published in 1995 by Pacific Press. It's My Son, Beloved Stranger, and I used the pseudonym Kate McLaughlin. And as I heard from quite a few other parents telling me how glad they were to know they weren't the only one going through something like this, I decided to start a newsletter. And this is the 7th year since I started it. I would guess probably over 500 families have received it, at either continuously or at one time for a while. I have come to know lots of parents, lots of gays and lesbians, and I've come to love them very much. I also have now an email online support group and a website, and I have had an exhibit about my ministry at several of our large meetings, like General Conference and ASI. And the more I meet people, the more I realize this is not just a few people in our church. I think probably when you factor in parents and brothers and sisters, there's hardly anybody in our church that isn't touched by this in some way. It's been over 15 years now, and I have gradually come to believe that not only must we accept our children who are gay and lesbian, but we must show them unconditional love. I've heard so many stories about parents who, when they find out their child is gay, they just kick them out of the house, disown them. One boy I heard about recently, his parents dumped his belongings out in the front yard and told him don't come in the house again. And that's not how God wants us to treat our children, I don't believe. I think whatever our understanding of the theology of it, we must show love to people. Well, I would like to see everyone stop judging this as a sin that's so much worse than anything else. Frankly, I don't see homosexuality as being a sin.
I would like very much to see the church become more inclusive. We say we're inclusive. We say we accept people of all races and all ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, and this, we publish this all the time. But at the same time we're doing that, we are practicing some specialized exclusion. And I think that until we can get over that then, I mean, if we don't get over it, I think we're going to have trouble when it comes to our own soul salvation.
I would like to see someday a study of this, objective, unprejudiced study of how we can deal with this theologically. But whether that comes about or not, we still need to encourage our gay and lesbian young people to still feel themselves part of our church family, and to accept them into our membership and encourage them, whatever their lifestyle.
Our society at large, gays in the military and in the workplace and everywhere else, this is an issue that seems to be with our whole society. And the church being, like most churches, conservative and lagging behind the cutting edge of social issues, I think our church, like many others, and more than some others, has lagged behind in addressing this issue. This is an issue that's not going to go away. Our church and our schools and our institutions have to address it one way or another.
I'm very happy that many of them are addressing it in a spirit of love instead of hate or downgrading. And I think that's extremely necessary.
So my goal is that the church will become more understanding, but we will, all of us, attempt to be more Christ-like, more loving, more kind, and then I think we should avoid setting ourselves up as God to make those kind of judgmental decisions. Let's leave it with God, because we know that He will handle it in the right way.
Some of my friends up here were very friendly until I started trying to talk about my son. And then they didn't want to hear about it. They really didn't know what to do with it. And I don't hold it against them. They just didn't understand. Now I know that they do understand more for various reasons. And, you know, we're all suffering in many ways. some of us just suffer in this way because we don't know what to do except keep them and love them. That's all I can see that there is for us to do. Jesus himself told us to love one another like he loved us. And I think that's what we need to do. It's pretty simple, isn't it?
Thank you for joining us for these 3 very important conversations. We can imagine that you have many unanswered questions and issues you would like to explore. We therefore hope that you will continue studying, praying, and conversing with each other, ever mindful that we are all children of God.